The Literary City with Ramjee Chandran, exclusively on IndigoMusic.com.
Hello, welcome back to the Literary City podcast with me, Ramjee Chandran, on IndigoMusic.com. My guest today is the New York-based Kamini Dandapani, an unusual historian. Unusual because a history blog that she was writing for her kids resulted in her being commissioned to write about the history of Rajaraja Chola, King of Kings, as her book is titled. The book covers the span of the rule of this king who, in the turn of the previous millennium, achieved more personally than entire dynasties have been able to do in their span of history. Let's start with Kamini Dandapani reading a passage from her exciting and absorbing book. Here she is.
1,000 and some years ago, there arose in southern India an empire that was among the most remarkable the world has seen. It grew atop the tottering scaffolding and shifting sands of fading dynasties and fierce rivalries, ruthless kings and double-crossing aspirants, myth-burnished, propelled forward by the slow burn of faith and the blazing fires of boundless ambition. It defied a myriad obstacles that came its way, and yet, through all the struggles and violence, it also cultivated and refined an aesthetic sensibility of breathtaking beauty. This was the Chola Empire. And in a dynasty that did not lack for larger-than-life characters, there was one in particular who stood head and shoulders above by the standards of any day. He was Rajaraja Chola, King Squared, King of Kings, a fitting name for this multifaceted man who built one of the world's most glorious empires, for whom a single Raja would be pitifully inadequate, wholly unequal to the magnitude of what he accomplished. He made his mark on the vast and messy canvas of the convoluted socio-political dynamics of his time, no mean feat in an era teeming with ambitious and brutal rulers. He fortified the foundations of what was till then a ragtag kingdom, put into place a meticulously organized system of administration, and led the empire into a period of magnificent splendor and grandeur that reigned supreme in military might, as an economic powerhouse, and in art, architecture, literature, music, dance, and religion. Who was this man, this king of jewels, incomparable Chola, great savior, jewel of the Sola dynasty, lion among kings? He was born Arulmozhi Varman in 947, the third child of Sundara Chola and Vanaman Madevi. His older brother Aditya Karikalan, the crown prince, was killed in suspicious circumstances, and so the younger son ended up being crowned emperor in the year 985. He was close to his older sister Kundavai and had a great deal of respect for his great aunt Sembian Madevi. This alone must have set him apart from the typical male of his time. Rajaraja was clearly a remarkable man with an extraordinary outlook and vision, a Jupiter in a universe of small planets. Narcissistic, ambitious, power-hungry, ruthless, far-sighted, shrewd, compassionate, generous. He makes for a fascinating character study.
There has been a lot of interest of late about the old Tamil kingdom, the Chola Empire. And that's for many reasons. The reason that looms the largest is the recent blockbuster movie Ponniyin Selvan, which is all about the most famous of all the Cholas, King Rajaraja. The movie has found itself politicized by a controversy about what labels to apply to Rajaraja's religion, but that's a subject for better minds than mine. The movie is based on a serialized account in a Tamil magazine, Kalki, written as historical fiction many years ago by this wonderful writer, Krishnamurthy. He was called Kalki Krishnamurthy because his identity was fused with that of the magazine. His articles ran for several years in the 1950s and then were published as a book that ran into several volumes and over 2,000 pages. Movies are one thing, but closer home, everyone that I know from the south of India has felt a need to learn more about the history of this region. In the national school curriculum, the history of the South was always reduced to a footnote. We were taught very little about our own history. It's hard to understand why. It's not that the history of the South was not as significant as the history of the northern empires about which we were schooled in pitiless detail. For one thing, the Cholas were one of the longest running empires in all of history. The earliest historic references to the Cholas dates back to 300 BC, and the empire was disestablished only in 1279 AD. That's just shy of 1,600 years. By comparison, the Mughal Empire ran from 1526 to say 1857. That's under 350 years. For another, while the Indian region was invaded and occupied variously for thousands of years, the Cholas were significant in their thalassocratic or maritime escapades into Southeast Asia, and their trade routes extended to Guangzhou in China and the Silk Route on the other side. The Cholas ruled the Maldives and Sri Lanka, and clearly they knew where to sail to and whom to fight. There was no greater time in all of the Chola years than during the rule of Rajaraja Chola that ran from 985 AD to about 1014 AD. That's about 3 decades. And if you made a list of all the stuff that he had achieved, from infrastructure and construction to military campaigns across the south and overseas, you would find it hard to figure out how someone could do so much in so little time in the present day, leave alone over 1,000 years ago. My guest today is Kamini Dandapani. She is a New York-based corporate executive, Chase Manhattan Bank and McKinsey Consulting being feathers in her plume. Kamini does not call herself a historian. As a hobbyist, though, she started writing a blog about historical places that she had visited in the south of India. She says that Aleph, the reputable publishing house, called and asked her if she would write a book. And she did. And this book is titled Rajaraja Chola, King of Kings. I chose Kamini Dandapani and this book to present on the podcast because it is a wonderfully structured book. The book is broken down into easily digestible chapters, and Kamini strikes no elegant postures in her recounting the rule of one of the most respected kings in all of world history. In the parlance of the present, we might refer to Rajaraja as woke, efficient, and progressive. Kamini's biography of him brings us closer to the history of the South in a way that cannot be replaced by comic books and movies. Kamini is a writer, a historian, a Carnatic singer, a Bharatanatyam dancer, and a trained Western classical pianist. And she joins me now from her home in Manhattan. Kamini Dandapani, welcome to the Literary City.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
You know, as I've just been saying, I can't think of another situation where so little is known publicly about so famous a man. I mean, our school history sucked, didn't it?
Exactly. I mean, this is something I quibble about all the time. I mean, I'm the last person to say that one history is better or worse or superior, inferior, nothing like that.
Right.
But our history that we were taught was very North India centric. So we had the Mauryas, Guptas, the Mughals, and then the British, and then the independence movement. I don't think we even heard about the Cholas or Pallavas or anything like that. So if we did, there was one paragraph that was tucked in somewhere.
Footnote.
Footnote.
So, barring Kalki Krishnamurti, we only have the comic book versions of Rajaraja.
Exactly.
It's something of a travesty that South Indians don't know South Indian history,
Yes.
right?
You're absolutely right. And the little bit that we do know is a kind of a Disneyland version. There are movies that are so far out that you can just laugh. You just have a good laugh.
But now that you've written this properly researched book, people must be coming up to you all the time and thanking you for doing it. You must hear this all the time, right?
Yes, that's definitely a common thread. Most people, just like what you said just now, they hated history growing up in school because of the way it was taught. It's just regurgitated dates and names without any interesting facts there. But I also think that in all of us, at some point in life, a switch gets turned on where we suddenly start becoming curious about our history.
Yes.
And then in my case, it was reading books like by somebody like William Dalrymple that really opened my eyes to how, and he was when I read The City of Jinns, I was like, wow, I lived in Delhi for a few years and I wish I had read it then when I was there in Delhi. And that a history could be presented in this fashion was kind of eye opening to me. So in some ways he was my inspiration, he is my inspiration. And the other thing is, I my kids are growing up here, not that they're interested, but I thought I'd start a blog and write about South India. Just it covers a wide range of things. I mean, South India.
I've read it. I've read your blog.
Okay, so that's just to kind of tell them what South India is about, without being pedantic, and just giving them different kinds of stories about it. And it was a kind of a fairy tale thing, I guess, because the publisher Aleph, somebody I guess saw it and they approached me and asked me if I would write this book. And I said, me, I'm not a historian. Yeah, and they said that's precisely why we're asking you, because we don't want a scholarly, dense academic kind of a book. We
Right,
want something that can be read by the layperson. So that's how that happened. And
Wonderful.
yeah, so,
Well,
yeah, but there are some wonderful writers out there today also writing these kind of histories. So
Yeah.
I'm hopeful.
getting to your subject, Rajaraja, he ruled from 985 to 1014 AD. Now, in the fullness of the history that we know, how long is that? Let's throw a dart at it. Call it 6,000 years.
Yes.
985 is
Yeah.
more than the halfway mark. It's closer to us than them.
That's definitely one way of looking at it. Yes.
So, put into perspective,
Okay.
985 AD seems like so long ago for a man like Rajaraja to be taking the strategic decisions that he did. But think about it, so much had already happened in history by then, hadn't it?
Exactly. Yeah.
So, let's see. Jainism and Buddhism were already about 1100 years old. The Achaemenid Empire was 1,000 years old. Christianity, St. Thomas in the same area was already had arrived 900 years before Rajaraja. Islam was 300 years before him. And let's not forget that his own empire, the Chola Empire, was over 1,000 years old at that point.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes. Yes.
So he must have lived among Christians, among Muslims, and in a well-developed society. So tell me, as a Rajaraja scholar, what sense of history do you think he had?
Well, you just said it just now. I think he definitely brought all those centuries of history into how he thought and how he ruled. I think Rajaraja was a man who had a very deep sense of history, and you can see that in a lot of his actions. And the world, we think of what we call it like globalization as something new. I don't think so at all. It has been going on ever since for millennia.
I agree.
Point. So even the earlier Sangam Cholas, who lived 2,000 years ago, had people from Greece and Rome come and trade with them. There have been coins from those times found there. There have been accounts of people traveling back and forth. So yes, we didn't have Google then, but there were other means of communication. So I think there was a lot of communication going back and forth. There was a lot of people traveling up and down to different parts, to China, to Southeast Asia, to Egypt, to the Fatimid dynasty, to those parts of the world. And I think Rajaraja was definitely had his ear to the ground, figuring out what was going on. For instance, he sent an expedition to China, a trade mission to China. How did he know that this was the place to go to? So he was aware that he had people come and report to him that this place is offering trade benefits, and it would be good to kind of set up a good trading partnership. He was aware that the Sri Vijaya kingdom to his east was vying for the same piece of the pie, and he was aware that he needed to do something to kind of overtake them and get to the Chinese. Similarly, a horse trader is who told him that there was anarchy and chaos in Sri Lanka, and he launched his attack over there. And the Cholas themselves had a sense of history going back way into the past.
So, what evidence is there of any structured education in the day?
Frankly, we just have like snippets that they had these Brahmin villages in which the children there were taught the Vedas and the scriptures. And I don't know who read and wrote, because I talked about the inscriptions on the walls. I doubt that the general public were able to read that, but there were certainly scribes who would have read them aloud to people. So what the level of literacy was, I don't know, but I'm guessing it's low. It was just a certain segment of society who could read and write. But education also covered the martial arts. For instance, they said Rajaraja had his son Rajendra well educated across a multitude of fields that included, horseback riding, elephant fighting, archery. So those were considered important in an era when, that's how you built your empire. But then they also said he learned the scriptures and that kind of thing. So what else they studied, I honestly I don't know.
So, how do they write? We know about the Virakala, the hero stones, the temple inscriptions, but it couldn't have all been
Yes.
stone. Right?
But they were also on palm leaf manuscripts.
Okay.
So I think whatever, for instance, if you gave an order or a grant, it was first inscribed on palm leaf documents, and then they were subsequently transferred to stone.
But the palm leaves survived, didn't they? I mean, everything we know from the Sangam period came from palm leaves.
Yeah, it's kind of mind-boggling if you think about it. So they must have had some technology to preserve these palm leaves, but then they were eventually discovered only in the 19th and 20th century, rotting away in attics and other
Right, but
places.
not rotting enough, right? I mean, a leaf falls in your garden and a few hours later it's gone.
Totally. Yeah. So I guess it was processed in some way to make it last longer. It is, if you go to the Saraswati Mahal Library in Tanjavur, they have some of those.
Never been there.
It is a remarkable
Right.
collection. And
But let's not also forget that these are the guys that made steel in 600 BC, exported it to the Middle East, from where the famous Damascus swords were made, right?
exactly. Yes.
Now back to Rajaraja.
Yes.
You say that when he was born, there was great fanfare and trumpets were sounded and so on. And people spoke of the birth of a new king. They foretold
it.
this, right? Were they just in a mood?
I think they were in a mood to say so because remember I said Cholas were masters at PR, at public relations, at kind of I think they mastered the art of social media and image projection way ahead before any of these became buzzwords.
That's cool.
So the truth is that it was Rajaraja's brother who was earmarked, who was supposed to become the king. So why would there be all this fanfare when Rajaraja was born, But they had to say all that he was born, he had the mark of Vishnu on his, on his arms, and all these bells rang and things like that. So it was all just to create this buzz that this great man is here on earth. And so much of history is like retrofitted. You kind of create all this image after the fact.
So fake news is not new, huh?
This is not new at all, sir. There are gullible people always.
Rajaraja the Great. Now, great is normally accorded to kings who win great battles, and it's military prowess and success normally. Now, you wrote that for the first several years of his reign, one didn't see too many hero stones extolling his exploits. You said that he was a good administrator and wanted to get things right. That would be remarkable.
It is, and I think it speaks to a certain maturity to Rajaraja. I mentioned that early on in his chapter that he had a long apprenticeship, first under his father and then his uncle, where he saw the ups and downs that the kingdoms went through and what it took to kind of push the kingdom forward. So I think he focused on, getting the house in order, attacking those kingdoms that needed to be attacked, primarily the Pandyas to the south, the Cheras to the west. And I guess he didn't blow his trumpet until he felt it was time to do that.
Now, isn't that the hallmark of an educated man?
It is, of a mature, educated man. I do think so. And I think Rajaraja was a mature person. His thinking was not, let's just kind of blindly, go in there and attack, but let's do it methodically and let's bide our time, so.
You speak highly of his administrative skills. In fact, you spend a lot of time outlining those practices.
That was a difficult chapter to write because it's tedious, and it's all the evidence is from his inscriptions. So again, when I said earlier that Rajaraja had a keen sense of history, I really believe that he recorded everything that he did. So when he commissioned his land survey, that was recorded, and he named the person who did it, and um, everything was inscribed on temple walls, because I think if there was a dispute or if there was any kind of questioning, you go to that wall and say, here it is. It's proven, and he standardized everything. So as I said earlier, he inherited a kingdom that was very kind of diverse, to put it mildly. There were people from uh, the hills, there were people from the river delta, there multiple castes of people, and they were all kind of brought together. So he had to kind of come up with a standardized way of running the whole thing. So everything, all the sources of information are inscriptions. And there are some amazing historians who have analyzed all the inscriptions, come up with the kind of data based on inscription analysis to get information on land ownership, who owned the land, how these villages were organized. You have inscriptions about village committees and how you got elected to the committee, and the level of detail is mind-boggling. It's really mind-boggling. And by a tip of my hat to the historians who went through this stuff. It's The Chola inscriptions are, I think, the most numerous of all inscriptions. I mean, they inscribed everything on their walls.
As a young Tamil boy, I got into trouble for scribbling on my walls.
Yes. You're allowed to do it. So,
Another thing that they say is that India didn't conduct military campaigns outside India. But that's not true of Rajaraja, was it now?
Yes.
I mean, he went everywhere, didn't he?
He did go everywhere, but he did not, nor did his son actually colonize them, meaning he was not their ruler or king. And again, the acid test is the inscriptions. His inscriptions were not there. But I think what he did was have them under a tight leash and say, you better listen to me. And you do as I say. And I think there were Chola women married to, princelings and kings and things from those parts. The only place they actually colonized was Sri Lanka, that is outside the mainland of India, and that proved very, very difficult. That was constantly, they did not like being under the Chola thumb, and there were constantly rebellions breaking out, and so it was for a short while actually that Sri Lanka remained a Chola territory. And they wanted it because it was rich in copper. In fact, there's a theory that a lot of the copper that came to make the Chola bronzes came from Sri Lanka. They were part of the trade route that went further east. And I think the pearl fisheries were also valuable to the Cholas, because they used the pearls for the jewels for their idols and things like that. But they did not colonize, contrary to what is believed. They did not actually colonize Southeast Asia, except perhaps culturally. So if you go there, the religion and the Hindu parts there, that probably came from the Pallavas.
Well, we can't blame him for the Thai people mixing up our epics now, can we?
Yes.
He also annexed the Maldives, didn't he?
Yes, Maldives. Yes, he attacked what they think are the Maldives off the west coast of India. They call it the 12,000 old islands of the sea or something like that. So again, those islands were also part of the trading route that came from Egypt and the Persian Gulf. And he one of his first military expeditions was against Kerala, actually, the Chera kingdom. And
right.
I think
he got into a snit with that guy and went there and chopped off his head.
These guys took offense when God knows what. So it's kind of funny, actually. So, but I think the Kerala people probably controlled those trade ports. So this was one way of getting a hold of that.
Your book is very interesting, and it clearly explains why you picked Rajaraja as your subject. A question.
Mm-hmm.
Many of your chapter titles have sun and moon motifs.
Yes. I did that deliberately because they're part of the solar dynasty.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of, I decided to use that whenever I could, actually.
Very nice theme. Did you pick those chapter titles yourself?
Yeah, I did all the titles myself. Yes. So the book cover also, they kind of played on that, and they had that big shiny sun on the cover. But
Nice
yeah, it
touch.
was. I kind of thought.
The way you describe the politics that Rajaraja had to endure, different people in the Kaveri Basin, other people squabbling, different factions, you could be describing modern Tamil Nadu politics.
Totally, Ramji, because you read and then you realize everything moves in a cycle. You think it's linear, it is not. It's like everything is going to go one way and then come back. So, in that, I guess
Okay,
that.
let's talk about the movie now. I really don't want to, but it is the elephant in the room.
It is the elephant in the room, yes. So, what do you want me to talk about? The movie or the controversy?
First, when did you start writing this book?
I would say about 4 or 5 years back, but I had a kind of a health thing in the middle, so that had to take a back seat. But yeah, it's been about 4 or 5 years. So, well, before the movie,
Complete coincidence?
it is totally coincidental, and I'm hoping to ride on the coattails of the movie. Why not? So
As
anyway.
indeed you should. It's a wonderful book. And for our listeners, there's a link in the podcast description to where you can buy a copy of Rajaraja Chola, King of Kings by Kamini Dandapani. And now for some trivial questions. You said that he was the son of Vanaman Mahadevi and Sundara Chola.
Was the son of Vanaman Madevin, yes.
And his wife was also Vanaman Mahadevi.
Yes. Yes. So these were not names, actually titles. So they were kind of modern.
Too many Vanaman Mahadevis. Common name?
Probably that too, but I don't think those were their birth names. So I think it kind of implied where they came from, or what clan they belonged to, something like that. Because I read somewhere that I think it is Panchavan meant a Pandya connection. So this is something I didn't probe too deeply into, but they were all monikers given to the queen, and so they all have. There's a handful of names, and it's very confusing because.
That certainly clears it up.
Yes.
You end your book with a number of adjectives: sublime, luminous. Did you feel that way, or did you just fall in love with your subject?
I never fell in love with him, but I did. You step back and you say, wow, here we are over 1,000 years later talking about him. That must mean something, right?
Right.
He was in this little corner of India, and he kind of made a mark, and he pushed his boundaries beyond anything that had been done that far. He did everything on a grand scale. So I don't think he would be the ideal dinner party companion. No, I would not like to sit there because he'd probably dominate everything and maybe behead a person or two. But definitely there is admiration. I admire the man, certainly. So I may not like him, but I certainly admire him. And I meant all those glowing words. So.
Yes, that's very clear. And proof of that is what you named your dog.
Well, the dog came earlier. He's just Roger. He was first named after Roger Federer.
I see.
But then I used to call him Rajaraja Chola, and I said, why not? So.
Well, game, set, and match to Rajaraja Chola over Roger Federer. Well, on that wonderful note, Kamini Dandapani, thank you so much for being my guest today on The Literary City.
Thank you. I really, really enjoyed it. Thank you very much for having me here.
My pleasure entirely. And that was Kamini Dandapani, author of Rajaraja Chola, King of Kings. Thank you for listening, and I will be back next week with the winner of the 2022 Booker Prize, Shehan Karunatilaka. This is the Literary City podcast with me, Ramjee Chandran, on the always fun, always entertaining IndigoMusic.com.